going. Okay, so this little introduction here. I mean, we've all seen his work, and now we have the fabulous Amir Bar Lev.
Thanks, Bob.
Brilliant.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. I'm really honored to have been invited here. I mean, I'm genuinely surprised and gratified, and thanks for watching Fighter and Trouble the Water. So, I mean, I'm going to basically, hopefully we'll just have a conversation. You guys can ask me questions. And but I just, one thing that you wouldn't know to ask me about, just been on my mind lately. The last time I was here, I was party crashing. And so this, like, this building was like, kind of like a bank we were trying to break into, you know, to steal from. My buddy is like the world's greatest party crasher. And you know, if you've ever been to like film festivals and stuff, you know that part of the whole game is, you know, getting into exclusive parties, and it's ridiculous because once you're in those parties, they're usually very, very lame. But so we kind of took it upon ourselves, you know, early on as we were with Fighter. Actually, the producer of Fighter is a guy I went to film school with in Czech Republic. You from Prague?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Anyway, so on the Fighter festival circuit, he used to be party crashing, and then we were at the Toronto Film Festival, and they asked 25 filmmakers to make to take 25 hours each to make a film, because it was their 25th anniversary. So I said, you know, Alex, you gotta just party crash and I'll film it and stuff. So we got, and it actually turned into this really fun short. We added all this kind of Taoist kung fu sensibility to it, because like, the paradoxical nature of party crashing is that you have to become invisible, and in order to become invisible, you have to draw as much attention to yourself as possible. So he would do these things like, you know, he had everything was codified too, so you had names for everything. Like, okay, I'm going to try the half-filled wine glass. If not, I'll do the cell phone bum rush. And then so you know, you go to these parties and you film outside for a few minutes, and you see people, you know, acting like assholes, saying, you know, I'm so-and-so's lawyer, now blah, 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 blah. And then he shows up like with a mirror ball. Just, sorry, I'm late, you know. So we got a pilot at VH1 with this short, and so we came here and really just set upon ourselves to crash these parties here, you know. And I mean, we got such good stuff. The chef routine, where you dress up in a chef's outfit, have 2 live lobsters, 1 in each hand. Sorry, I'm late. You know, but this was really like this place right here that we're sitting in. You know, but this is like the belly of the beast. And if you've ever been to the Cannes Film Festival, it's like, you know, there's all these levels of exclusivity. It's like, well, you know, the party's on the beach. You know, it's really the yachts. And if you get to the yachts, it's really the islands, and it's really the, you know, but really like. The red carpet here is, you know, I mean, it's hallowed ground, basically, you know. So he not only got on the red carpet, but he got on at the moment that they clear all the lesser celebrities off of the red carpet. Then they start up this, like, kind of fairy music, this twinkling fairy music, and then they just let the belle of the ball walk up by herself. And then this year it was Nicole Kidman. And, you know, as she's going up, my buddy is like, you know, basically in there. He pretended to be a photographer, and then he did all these things, and he's walking up there right behind her. And, you know, at the top of the stairs here, you know, he's just like waves, and we got the whole thing. We got cameras all across the Quasette and stuff. And it was a total ratings disaster for VH1. It's like, they were shocked at how poorly it did. But, you know, it's very proud of, you know, it's like, and it was at the height of the whole Iraq war. Like, you know, in America, they weren't calling French fries, they were calling them freedom fries. So we had all this fun riffing to do, you know, about like, all the gendarmes guarding the red carpet. You know, we were saying stuff like, you know, it seemed that the entire French army was here, you know, which would explain why they hadn't been seen anywhere else. And anyway, all this, like, we thought it was very funny kind of geopolitical humor, but obviously the VH1 audiences didn't share that sentiment. So, so that's my party crashing in Cannes story. And if you want afterwards, I can give you some of his tricks for your own use this week. So you saw, so, you know, and Trouble. So, I mean, one thing that I think I just found out that you watched Fighter and Trouble the Water, and I'm here promoting Regeneration, which is the latest film I did, and we just did a panel here, and you know, we kind of touched on it, but I think it's something that'd be good to talk about with you guys, it connects Regeneration Fighter and Trouble the Water, and that is spontaneity and improvisation. You know, in the commercial, strictly spots world, you know, there's really, one of the things I'm very interested in about it is the deliberate, you know, the deliberate nature of it, how you really have to have every single thing in place, and a lot of thought goes into, you know, just every iota of it. And in the documentary world, it's really about improvisation. You know, it's about, it's not about being, you always hear this term, be a fly on the wall. I mean, I think that's a total misnomer. You know, if you're a fly on the wall, you're not gonna, you're just observing, and it's not about observing. It's about, because you can't just observe. You know, you're there with the crew, so, you know, you're affecting it as you go, but it's something in between just observing and doing what you do in a commercial. It's someplace in the middle where you are constantly kind of setting up constructs of where you think the story is going to go, and then being open to it telling you that no, it's not going there, and then you have to reevaluate. And I mean, Fighter, you see it where we, you know, this huge fight breaks out between these two guys, you know, and it becomes the story of the road trip they're on becomes actually the story rather than, you know, it being about Jan Wiener's heroic journey. So that was a lot of, you know, late night with the crew, you know, oh God, we don't have a film, you know, and what do we do now? And I mean, we really had to think on our feet. And in fact, we kind of nosedived that story in order to get an ending, you know, because the ending we had been imagining all along was not happening. So we basically decided, when you see that argument on camera, or they, you know, where they, yeah, I mean, where Jan pulls off his mic and walks out. So that was, you know, that was, a lot of that kind of fighting was happening off camera. And we said, like, okay, we got to stop that. We have to have this happen on camera. And so we basically kind of like crash the thing in order to find the story. So, and then, you know, parenthetically, and then I'll shut up, but like, you know, so the last scene, which I absolutely love, they're playing checkers with one another. So what happened there was, as you see in the card, there was 3 days down, you know, where nobody would speak to each other, and I knew it was like our last day of shooting, so I knew that everybody, it was our last day in Italy, and I knew that they would probably try to have some kind of reconciliation and be this gorgeous scene. So I had the crew ready with cameras, and I said, like, we're going to go to the beach, and when you see these two guys who haven't spoken to each other in, you know, 3 days, when you see them start to walk, get your camera on and roll. Well, there was a mutiny, and they decided that they didn't want to, they said, you've done enough damage to this friendship, we're not going to take part in it anymore. And I'm freaking out on this beach in Italy going like, get your camera and get your boom and get over there. And basically they, you know, they refused to do it. And then later when we listened to they finally agreed, and when we listened to the transcript, or we listened to the, you know, because you always have to translate what they talked about, because when they were really having a conversation being checked. And sure enough, like what they had said while walking down the beach was like, you know, I love you, all this kind of stuff. So I created that whole checkers thing, you know, to kind of give us a sense that they were back together, and I said, like, shoot it this way so that, you know, it's a reveal and all this thing. And it's so much better. I might be just bullshitting myself, but I think it's so much better than, you know, I love you, man, and whatever else, because it just, you know, it's nuanced, you know, and it's doesn't say much. It just lets you understand that these guys have found a way to be friends in a sort of a fashion, you know. Trouble the Water, we didn't go down there at all to meet these two guys. We went down there to film the National Guard coming back, because then when New Orleans was flooded, and all the National Guard, you know, it's like, where was the French Army? Where was the American Army when they were supposed to be like defending Iraq? And the National Guard is the wing of American military that's supposed to be the homestead, you know, in case of trouble. Well, all the National Guard was in Iraq when Katrina hit. So that's why all the people died. You know, that's why all the people didn't get evacuated. So the Army saw this as a public relations disaster, and they flew back under cover of night. The Louisiana National Guard, who had been in Fallujah, like doing heavy, you know, what they weren't supposed to be doing, they were doing in heavy combat. So that was a great story. We went down there to get that story. We were getting that story when this African-American couple saw our camera and said, you guys need to be filming us, because we've filmed the whole, you know, the whole thing, and you know, I mean, like what I'm trying to kind of impart to you is you got to be nimble, you have to be ready to improvise. And if we said like, could you please get out of our shot, we're doing it, we would not have gotten nominated for an Oscar and all the great things that happened. So we just said, okay, good, let's go do that, you know, and that is what happened, to simplify. Regeneration, you know, time and again, you know, you're basically filming people make music, and you know, you have to, if you're trying to impose a story too much, you're gonna miss the magic moments. And if you're not imposing a story at all, you're also gonna miss the thing. I mean, the whole thing is to set up a structure that's gonna allow for spontaneity. And so now I'll shut up and open up for a conversation with you guys.
Right, in your movies, let's say for instance with the kid, it seems to me that I've worked on editing one documentary before that was shot by two friends of mine, and we had around 15 stories in one story, and editing is choice, so we had to make a choice.
Yeah.
In your movies, how was that process for your movies,
right,
and how many stories did you have
to
find the story that you wanted to?
Well, okay, I think it's a really interesting process. I started as an editor. I think it's like the best entree into documentary and probably into any part of all these things, because really the editing is, as we all know, it's like where the story gets shaped. And I think a mistake that a lot of people make is they take their best footage and they try and draw a line through it, you know, so that they can include all the things that seemed fantastic out in the field. It's not that you know, the reason people say kill your babies is because you have to, once you get into the edit, you have to forget about what great stuff you have and forget about, because all that matters is the story. And a story is a cohesive thing that usually has 3 acts and has a certain arc to it. And what you need to do in order to find that arc is just stand back and try and figure out, I mean, it's very old classical narrative things, right? And we did that a lot. Nick Davidge here, raise your hand. Nick and Steve Bender were my co-collaborators on Regeneration. Nick is the creative director of the agency, or of Greenlight, which is an agency that was involved in it. And he and I worked really closely to, you know, we were in the edit trying to figure those things out. And we did a lot of like, okay, you know, act 1 is this, act 2, act 3, and you know, and you have those heartbreaking moments where like, but what we've just talked about doesn't allow for the great scene where so-and-so happens to that. Kill your babies, you know. And so, I mean, I think people try and, yeah, you should have a bunch of different stories going, obviously, but they have to work in concert with each other. And I think that's what separates good documentaries from lousy ones is, and in fact, you know, I'm rambling a little bit, but on Trouble the Water, that was a big problem, actually, that we had, you know, and I didn't direct it, you know, and there was a moment, it's so funny, I never told you this, but in Regeneration, there's a song that Erykah Badu writes, and she writes it because she overhears Trombone Shorty say, I'm going to go get some gumbo. So she gets the idea, like, I'm going to write a song about gumbo. Well, we had a gumbo thing also, because it was also a New Orleans story, so gumbo comes up. So we were in the edit, hashing things out, and there was a lot of holding on to babies. And I was saying to the directors, guys, you know, this is, you forget about that. Basically what I just said to you. And they said, like, it's a gumbo, it's a gumbo. They were saying, like, it's a narrative gumbo. I'm like, it's not a gumbo, you know, it's got to be a sandwich or something else, but the metaphor can't be gumbo in this case.
Hot dog.
It's a hot dog, yeah, right. So anyway, yeah, if it's music, it can be a gumbo. That's a great analogy for music, you know, because you're throwing in all these different influences. But I don't think that a documentary can be a gumbo. And they finally came around, you know, and like, I went away for a while. I was like, you guys got to just get to a cut or something like that. And the gumbo idea went away. So, yeah. Hi.
You know them before shooting a documentary, or you find their story and says myself, oh, I want this story to shoot and make the
Sure, yeah. Well, on Fighter, so you guys saw Fighter. So what happened was I went to FAMU, the Czech film school for half a year, the Prague Film Academy. And while we were there, I wasn't in FAMU, the school. I was in kind of an international program of FAMU, and it's called 3F. And one of our professors was Jan, and he would take us out drinking, and he would tell us all the different places in Prague where he'd gotten laid. And it was fascinating, because he really was in his, and I mean, you see, he.
Bob did the same yesterday here at Cannes.
There's a film there.
There's a quick trip.
Yeah.
I was saving that one, but.
Right. Okay. I mean, it's another story that's. I'm glad you asked it because it has to do with being quick on your feet. So what happened was, I said, I'm going to make a film about this guy, Jan Wiener. I went and was an editor for a while, and like a year or two after getting out of college, I said, of all the stories I've ever heard, this guy, Jan Wiener, was the best. I'm going to make my first film about him. And so I did a shoot with him, and I asked him to tell me all the stories that he had told us over wine in Prague. Not just about getting laid, by the way. I mean, it was, the stories that you hear in the film. He told them again, absolutely wrote. Absolutely, it was a shtick, basically. I mean, here's a guy in his 70s, and he's told this story so many times. He's written a book about it. He's been interviewed about it. That it's dead. It's a dead story. There's nothing spontaneous in it. And I mean, actually, now that I'm 10 years older or whatever, I understand that better than at the moment that this happens. More than that, 13, 15 years ago. So, at the moment, when you get older, I mean, you start to see that actually that's how everything goes. You do become a shtick. You become rote. But at the time, I thought, oh my God, I've made a terrible mistake. Like, here I am, because I already kind of went down the road a little bit. So then another one of those late nights where you're going, what the hell am I doing? And after the first weekend, I looked back over the weekend with him, and the only interesting parts of it were the moments where he was complaining about his friend, Arnosh Blitzky. And not on camera, just like, when we were just having a beer or whatever, he would say, he was telling, Arnosh just visited me, he brought this cheap wine, I told him to shove it up his ass, blah, 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 blah. And so I started thinking, I need to bring this guy Arnosh into this story, because this is where he comes alive. So it's an act of mischief, It's an act of sabotage in a way, right? So, but it's, that's how his story, Jan's story comes alive through Arnosh's interrogation, And that's why the film works. So I brought in Arnosh, and Jan never knew why we did that. He never understood. He, explained it over and over again, but he kept saying, until he died, which was very recently. He just kept saying, all I wanted to do is go through Italy and tell my story. You told me that's what we were going to do, and So, anyway, and they just died. They both just died within 6 months of each other. You know that probably, but Jan and Arnosh died this year. So, yeah. Yeah.
You talk a lot about spontaneity.
Yeah.
How do you prevent your crew from actually changing the reactions of the people you are shooting with? Because you are not actually working with actors. So I suppose that those people being in front of a camera, that should have an impact on them. And how do you prevent that thing from interfering in the story you want to tell?
Okay, well, there's an art to that, which I'm constantly trying to learn, But I mean, the short answer is it's not about preventing that impact. It's about just embracing that impact. And somebody said something great to me recently. It's like with an animal and a foreign object. Like if you bring it in later, it becomes a thing. With a dog, like an umbrella, they'll start barking at it or something like that. But if you introduce the umbrella right off the bat, and the umbrella is here, it's in the room, then you can train a dog to just live and just ignore it. Same with a cat, or so I think it's just about owning the camera, owning the crew, owning the fact that you're there, not tiptoeing around, and just we saw that in Regeneration completely. These are musicians who are creating music, and this is their process, and they're used to. It's a very vulnerable process, and they're not used to having two cameras around, And there's a moment in Regeneration where Erykah Badu, sends everybody out of the room except for our crew, and she's just sitting there by herself in this quiet moment, writing this gumbo song, and it's only because we introduced the object early on, you know, and just you just have to, you know, you can't tiptoe around. Is basically what it comes down to. And actually, you'll be so surprised at how much people will embrace the camera. You know, if you don't sort of apologize for it at the outset. So yeah.
I've just been watching a few documentaries recently, and like the story, something either spectacular happens or just gets into a crazy place, and it's almost like I don't know. Obviously, the story didn't start like that, so it almost seemed like a stroke of luck.
Yeah.
On behalf of the doc, that either shit went really bad or really
right.
good.
Yeah.
Like, so do you sometimes start stories and then like just ditch them because it's not going?
Yeah, I mean that's what I've done in pretty much every film, and actually it is kind of almost a trope in documentaries. You know, just like I sometimes serve on grant panels or whatever, and then you read like the treatments, and everybody's like, we didn't set out to get the story of that. So much so that I think it's a funny comedy, and nobody better steal this. But I'm starting to write a little comedy about the parasitic nature of that. How, like, you know, God forbid everything should go fine for your documentary subjects when you're making a film. You know, so you gotta like hope that something bad happens, or if it's not happening, then you know, actually help it along, help a bad thing along. So you know, you got a film there. You know, and so. You know, I'm watching any of you guys because I know some of you are writers. I don't want. Anyway, I think there's something hysterical and sort of pathetic and parasitical about the whole thing. But yeah.
So what about reality television?
Yeah.
Where it's all about.
I'm doing that right now. Actually, I'm making 2 pilots for Nat Geo. One of them, they asked me to do a film about extremism in America because it's a rising thing, whatever. So I said, well, let's do something about extremists and their neighbors. Because I just always like dialogue. I think dialogue is interesting. You know, that's why I didn't fight her. And so, anyway, I sent over. I not only got access to a Ku Klux Klan rally in the Deep South, but I got these. If you ever saw Meet the Fockers, you know, like the Barbra Streisand, Dustin Hoffman couple. I basically brought a couple like that to this Klan rally. They're super liberal, you know, North Carolina, and so I got this. I mean, I feel like it was an amazing feat. Like, when it happened, my crew put in like 18-hour days. It was an absolute feat of production because we had to infiltrate the Klan. We tried to do it ahead of time, and we found this one Klan guy who was going to do it. If you don't know the Ku Klux Klan, you probably all know that. They're racist. You know, they're white supremacists, right? So it was an amazing feat to get in there and be able to film with release forms and everything, and then a doubly amazing feat to bring this liberal couple in there, and we have footage of like this liberal couple talking to that guy full on white robes, you know, and arguing with him, right? So I brought this back, and again, this shouldn't be this room, but like, I brought this footage back. Well, right now, what we're dealing with.
There's a camera right there.
Is there really? Oh yeah. See, this is. Are you gonna put this on YouTube? All right. Well, I'll tell you afterwards. The executives are fantastic there. No, I think reality TV is, you know, bullshit basically, and I think I'll just speak in generalities. I think, you know, it's. I mean, it's. There's a big difference between imposing a story the way we've been talking about it, where you're being open to the complexity of a story. You know, obviously, what the mind does with narrative is it simplifies. It's like, oh, okay, so, you know, these guys are good guys, and the American government's bad, and these guys saved the lives of all the people in their neighborhood. But then, you know, you got, that's a cartoon basically. You know, you got to be more complex in your drawing of people because we are more complex than white hat, black hat. You know, that's what being open to the reality of people. And nobody fits those cartoon kind of caricatures, and reality TV is imposing a story, but it's imposing a cartoon story on people. You know, it's imposing a caricature. It's like deciding so quickly, oh, you know, okay, he's the bad guy, and we'll know he's the bad guy because of the music that you hear when he comes on. And I mean, I think that does not do anything for human beings, you know, to be exposed to that kind of like a simplification of reality, that just kind of perpetuates our problems. I don't want to get on a high horse, but I think, why I wanted to do that dialogue is, obviously I'm not condoning the white supremacists, but I think you learn more about them by actually treating them as human beings than just, bum bum bum, the Klan, it's just like, then everybody's monsters and heroes and stuff like that, and we're back in cartoon land, but I'm being asked to do that now.
So like Louis Theroux always does that?
Louis Theroux, I think, is great. He was kind of my model, actually, and in a good way, right? Is that what you're saying?
Well,
I think Louis Theroux, it does think of things in complex.
Yeah, but at the end, it's like, dude, they have sort of told their human side, but he just keeps on laying on the same question. After a while, after 1.5 hours, I'm always like, I see the human side now.
Yeah.
Come on, Louis. Come on, just let it go now. But
right. I don't know. I've only recently been exposed to him. I'm kind of late to the game with him, and I think I don't know. I think he's pretty great, and there needs to be more people doing that kind of journalism personally. But maybe it goes on a little bit long, but that's part of the shtick too. Is like the kind of he's sort of needling people that way,
I bet we find out in a year's time that he's actually Sacha Baron Cohen.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Hi.
Do you ever worry about getting too much footage? Because I shoot these documentaries with where we track down retired athletes. At the beginning, our mentality when we were doing it was just shoot as much as you can. But then when I found out after, maybe just because it's a really low budget thing, we find out after when you have too much footage, you kind of everything kind of gets diluted and you sort of lose the story of it. I don't know if
But see, I would say not to bang on same point over and over again, but I would say that's a problem of not getting varied enough footage. Because I don't think you can have too much footage, especially these days with nonlinear editing and everything. So, and then I think you got to transcribe everything. That is key. Everything, because you do have a volume of material, and if you don't transcribe it, you don't have any kind of index to it at all. So I think you need verbatim transcripts of everything. And I think again, Nick here, when we were working, I was real struck by the way you, that was a conversation we had a lot, where I would just be sort of like, okay, let's just see where this goes, because you got to be patient. But at the same time, Nick would be like, well, good, we basically got this. Now let's get it this way, let's get it that way, and then you do end up loving having that kind of variety, when you come back. So, remember those conversations? We got a ton of stuff that we didn't use. A ton of stuff. But you are happy for that stuff in the edit. Where you're like, gosh, what if we had this? Oh yeah, we got something like that.
Mostly, I think
key, and that's part of the whole, hooking up your editor with stuff that could be played, because you don't know. This sounded kind of nebulous, but I'm dealing with this new film I'm working on right now, and it's about a trial that's unfolding. And I don't know which way, obviously I have no way of knowing which way the trial is going to go. Yet I have to keep filming. So I'm trying to film for either possibility, that the guy gets off or doesn't get off. That's why you can never have too much stuff, because you don't know where things are going to go. And so what we did a lot, was like, okay, if we're playing this as the fish out of water, we need this kind of a line. And if we're playing it as, this guy's totally comfortable, we need a different kind of line, or we did a different kind of scene, And that's the fun thing. It's like, the story has to go somewhere, so you have to kind of be accommodating for any possibilities.
So, it's interesting because we were talking before you came about your style. It's interesting you came out of editing, because we were saying how your films aren't linear. You move backwards and forwards in time, and you shift around a lot. And that's kind of very cool. But as an editor, if you're directing commercial, if you're directing a feature film, you're shooting for the cut, so you're always knowing, I've got to do a pickup shot here, because I can get from there to there, and tell the story. But you have to you're not shooting. So with your editing background, as you're filming, do you think, oh shit, this is going to...
But you do the same thing in documentary. You are shooting for the edit. At least I am. I'm constantly editing it. Like if I'm doing an interview, I'm editing it as they're talking. And then I'm listening and I see where my holes are, and then a lot of times you're wrong about where you thought it was going to go or whatever, but that's why you're just trying to coverage, basically.
But because I'm with you, I think, and there's actually Tim Mullers, we had Tim Mullers communications yesterday, and he said if he lived his life again, he would be an editor, start out as an editor, because it's the most important piece of filmmaking. And I've seen that so many times in my career. You get good rushes, and then they just want to cut.
Right.
And then you get bad rushes, and they edit beautifully.
Yeah.
And you get a better film. But in terms of like, say, Trouble the Water, where you go, so you're thinking about shooting for the car, but you go from them, driving down the street, seeing all the devastation, and then suddenly you cut way back and to the year previous with the footage you got of the levee breaking.
Right.
So how do you get to that? What makes you go, shit, what I'm going to do, this isn't linear, so I'm going to jump right back over here. Because that's what's going to give a drum. Do you just find that something's a bit soft at that point and you need to regenerate?
I mean, it's so like this thing I'm working on right now. I'm trying to figure out what the tense is, because I have this idea. Okay, it's all leading towards what? Sorry, let me back up. So on the Tillman story, what I did was I ripped off a little bit from Sergio Leone, Once Upon a Time in America, and where it basically, the whole movie ends up being like the thing that Robert De Niro was thinking about when he took a hit of opium at this crucial moment in his life, and he had no way of knowing all the shit that was going down while he took that hit of opium. But you find out in this cloverleaf fashion that what really happened, and then returns back to this kind of moment. And it's just a gorgeous kind of narrative structure. So Tillman's story was a little bit of that and a little bit of Pulp Fiction, where you're kind of following a story. You keep coming back to a central moment, like a pinnacle moment, which in Tillman's story's case was this memorial service, where almost all the major characters were there, and each of them had their own trajectory. They would never sort of cross paths again. So you keep coming back to, you come back to that 3 times, and that was figured out in the edit. That we didn't figure that out ahead of time. But that was a film that there was really no action kind of developing as we were filming. It was all basically just a bunch of material that we were finding form for in the edit. Right now, I'm making something where there's a possibility of doing another one of these cloverleaf things, because everybody's telling me. So I'm making a film about Penn State, which is. You know what? Actually, you really shouldn't put this on YouTube. Actually, if you want, because then I can talk totally freely. Because I have character. Okay, good. So don't put it on the internet. Okay, great. Yeah, it's just for internal stuff. Yeah, because I would hate for my characters to be like, well, this is where this asshole was driving us all along. So that just happened. Remember, I just mentioned to you that the Nat Geo thing blew up. So that's what happened. So I had a producer. Now I'm just going to speak freely. So I had this producer I had hired who. She sent the schedule to the Ku Klux Klan before we did it. And on it says, then you're going to be talking to the neighbors and da-da-da. I'm like, what, are you crazy? She's like, yeah, but I mean, you got to get them to agree to it. And I said, yeah, you do that on camera, and you let them fight with you, and that's part of the story, like, obviously, And they backed out at the last minute, so we had to find a new Ku Klux Klan member,
and a new producer.
Yeah, and the new producer. Believe me, it was me. So that's why I say right now, like I would hate for my new people to hear what my plans are for them. You never want to do that, But my plans for them are, as it's developing, I think that it's about Penn State, right? So there's this scandal developing in the United States. We're on this football program, and there was a child molester. And this community is trying to come back on its feet. And I think they're going to try and come back on its feet at the moment of this first home football game, which will be in the fall. Everything will be behind them, and that's really their identity. It happens in this great pageantry of this where all of my characters are going to be in the same place. And it's the spectacle. It's just, I mean. It's not just the game, but it's like this huge stadium with all the pageantry. So I'm thinking about a new cloverleaf kind of pattern where I would start at morning time, it's pre-dawn, and then I would find my characters in that game, and then I'd go back, and track them back over what we're shooting now, and then meet them back up to this moment, because it's really, I've already heard people are just like, it'll all be at that game when we decide if we're healed or if we're broken, basically, you know. So anyway, that's kind of what I'm thinking right now. I'm only a couple weeks into it, but it's very challenging to try and shoot for something like that because the tenses get kind of weird and you don't know how much to. I mean, I'm sort of lost in the weeds in this, but the point is, another thing that I can give you as a takeaway is time stamping is really crucial, and it was for Regeneration, for instance. We would always check in with the characters and ask them where they're at that moment, because that's where you get the magic stuff of like, I mean, people saying, because nothing ever happens the way people think it's going to happen. So if you get them to predict where they're going to be in an hour, in a month, in a year, and then with the magic of editing, you know, you pull it up so that it happens very quickly for the audience. I mean, that's where you get the documentary gold, you know, and so like in Regeneration, you know, we have like this young DJ walking up to this octogenarian country musician that he's, you know, about to propose a sort of a type of a duet with, and he's walking up to him, and you hear his internal dialogue, which we got before this moment, well before the moment, you know, and he's going like, I made some changes to the song, you know, and you know, I realize a lot of people have done this differently, and you know, so I'm just I'm gonna make up my own words, and just, you know, I'm hoping Dr. Stanley will be cool with it. And at that moment, he, you know, through editing, we get him to the moment where he basically says to Ralph Stanley, you know, so I would like to do it this way, and the guy just goes, I'd rather do it my way, you know. And it's like this magic moment, you know, because it's the conflict of reality against, you know, and you know where you think things are going, and that you only get that if you check in with your audience with your subjects constantly about where they think things are going. You know, in My Kid Could Paint That, which was a film about a 4-year-old painter who had this meteoric rise as a child prodigy, and so one of the characters was her dealer, her art dealer. So there's this moment in it where I say, you know, so what's next? And he's kind of spinning a little bit, trying to spin me. You know, he's like, things are, you know, things are on the rise. You know, things are going to be great. I can't see us not selling. You know, they were selling for like $20,000. I can't. You know, I asked him, so where do you see, you know, track where you think the price of these are going to go? And you know, you're editing it basically, but he says, you know, I can't see these selling for less than $100,000 in a few months or something like that. And then you just cut. You know, the title comes up like. Or maybe the title doesn't even come up, but you know, it's like cuts to, and you have to say like, it's a couple months later, and sales have pretty much fallen off the cliff. Haven't sold anything, and you know, it's like a great moment, you know. And the only way I got that is by check-in, you know.
The father character in that movie for me was the most. I mean, that guy is. There's a movie on its own just with the guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I won't be making that. Maybe you can. But yeah, then there's another that just comes to mind. Like there's a great movie called Same River Twice, which is about all these guys who go on. They used to be friends in the '60s going on a river trip, and they get together. They do the river trip again decades later. And one of the guys in the character is just sort of lost in the '60s. He's just a wonderful, charismatic hippie guy who still lives on the river. All the rest of the people have kind of grown up except for him. And there's a great scene where he says, I'm building my house right here, and I'm using Fibonacci sequences to lay out the floor plan. You know, so everything has to be a prime number. And he's pointing to the floor plan. He actually has like the foundation just like actually laid out like in tape or whatever of where this house is going to go. It's like the size of this room or whatever. Everything's a Fibonacci sequence, and I've meticulously planned out. And he's pointing down, the camera pans down, and then there's a dissolve, and it says like 1 year later or something. And then nothing has changed, you know, it's still, you know, and then it pans back up to him. You know, I ran into some hassles, and it says volumes about this guy's character that you couldn't say any other way except, where are you going now? And then you wait around and you show where people actually do go. Yeah.
You're talking all the time about how you don't know how things are going to change, what the end of the movie is going to be, and I think you do need to get some funds to make those movies, and I just wonder, because in advertising you just have to explain everything, how it's going to be. It's the smallest detail of not knowing means your project is almost definitely rejected, because something bad could happen. But in your case, how do you convince them? I think now it's easy because you're a great guy, you did many great stuff, but how was it in the beginning? How did you get the trust?
No, you don't. You have people freaking out saying you don't know what the fuck you're doing. I have that in Nat Geo right this second. And it's just, I mean, yeah, good question. I mean, that is about, people have to hire people they trust. You know what I mean? And you will face this with the people. I don't know how you convince that to people above you on the totem pole, but I can just tell you the knowledge of how tough it is should inform how you hire people. You got to hire people who you don't have to micromanage, but you trust them to. I mean, we had this fantastic edit team on Regeneration. It really is all about the editor on a lot of levels. Like just now, because 9 a.m. in New York. I just fired one of the editors because I have Skype here. So just before I spoke to you, I just said I don't trust this editor. I don't have the trust. We have to get rid of her. So I just set the ball in motion to fire her. So it's because if you don't trust your editor, then you're just especially with editing, right? Because editing is a sculpture, And if somebody was buying the sculpture at its end point, saying, "Well, I don't see, a Valkyrie in there," he's like, "Yeah, you don't see a Valkyrie because we are making our way towards this." And right now, my question to you is, do you like where the wing is gonna be? And it's like if somebody's like, "Well, I can't, I don't," then there's a total breakdown in the thing. So everybody you have to have trust throughout the crew, and you have to understand what you're looking at. What you're looking at is not, and the final thing. And by the way, just to push the metaphor way past its use, but the editor should be showing you the general block of where the wing is going to go, and then a little detail of the feather, so you can just to help you along. Sometimes if you don't see a little bit of the fine cutting, basically, then you might. Some people can see it, but other people can't. So, to be able to send it up the totem pole and say here we put music in here. We don't want to spend a bunch of time putting in music that we haven't all agreed on right now, but here is a little sense for how it's going to pace out and stuff like that. That's how it should go, yeah.
So you speak of all this unpredictability,
yeah.
But in movies like Trouble the Water,
yeah.
How do you decide when it's the end?
Right.
Because
the
story keeps going today.
Right. So, well, I'm so glad you watched it, but that was my first foray into producing, and I didn't make that decision.
But even for the fighter, or even
how do I know it was? Just because it's like a piece of music, It's like if you're just jamming along a piece of music, and the end. It's like that note gets hit, and I knew I was there, on Fighter. I knew I was there on the Tillman story. I knew I was there on My Cake to Paint That. On My Cake to Paint That, we actually filmed ourselves leaving. Because we knew we'd never see these people again, basically. It's just a piece of music that, it's, and how some music can have false endings. That's actually great pieces of music, just seem like they're over, but they're not over. It can go to some higher summit, but then you kind of know when you're at the end, And it's we knew that on Regeneration. We knew it as we were shooting it, where the endings were going to be, basically. I don't know. That's probably not a great answer, but. I just think it has to do with story. It has to do with understanding story and understanding what the end note is. Yeah. Yeah.
You said earlier about helping a little bit. Do you actually have to do that a lot just to help the storytelling, or you just?
Absolutely. No, never let it go. Yeah, totally help it. You have to be Machiavellian. I think you absolutely do have to. See, an interesting question for me is what's the difference between that and reality TV, where everything is artificial? And the answer is not that one manipulates and the other just observes. I think people have a sense about documentary that it's some noble kind of thing. It's just as parasitical and manipulative, and no, it really is. It really, truly is. Jan, you watch Fighter. This is why it's good to just. This is the useful dirt, right? So it's a sleight of hand. They weren't going to go on that road trip together if we hadn't pushed them on the road trip together. Do you care as an audience member? No, you don't, because there's a deeper truth. There's a really interesting thing you should look up. It's called the Minnesota Manifesto. It was like a drunk Werner Herzog. I think he was drunk, and he kind of comes out with this screed against against the notion that documentary film should be observational, you know. And he just talks about like the difference between truth and facts. You know, like facts are what you read in the yellow pages, in that, you know, in a phone book. And truth is like deeper truth that we're trying to get at. And whether you got there in a kind of a manipulative way or not, it doesn't matter. You know, because, I mean, whatever, the Odyssey is a manipulation, you know. Sergio Leone, all our stories are manipulations in service of a truth, right? And I mean, that's the 5 DJs on Regeneration. We're not going to, and people say, well, how? The audience is going to be like, well, why? Why are they working with these people across genres and stuff like that? They wouldn't have done it. Nobody ever asked that question because nobody cares. You know, that fact that, yeah, okay, we put them together in the room with these people they're doing these duets with, because there's a deeper truth, you know. So the difference between reality TV and documentary is not in the level of manipulation, it's in the simplification of the storytelling, I think. Yeah?
I noticed, like, these films that we watch here, they're not overly stylized in terms of, like, the actual film itself, I would say, like, compared to some other stuff. So do you try to keep, is that a way to keep it?
Those two, no, I'm done with that kind of shit. I did Fight It That Way, and Trouble the Water was totally done that way. And then my second film, my Kick a Paint Out, was done on a crappy camera and just real fly by night. But Tillman's Story and Regeneration, I mean, just absurd levels of like stylization. Not stylization so much as just like high production value. On Regeneration, all the, like I was alluding to this before, and I was saying these musicians just let us do stuff. We actually like put down dollies. You know, we were using prime lenses. You know, so you know, you were shooting into light and stuff like that. So you really would have to say like, Erica, if you could just take a step forward, you know, a perfect shot, stuff like that. And you know, all highfalutin things aside, I was nervous about it. And it was just another example of how people are ready to go with you if you just introduce it early on, set the tone. That's an interesting thing about documentaries, which I think is a really fascinating aspect of it. There's no rules to documentaries, but you set up rules in the first 10 minutes of the film. And the audience goes along with you. And more so than any other cinematic genre. You can do that to certain degrees in feature films, but in a documentary, there's an infinite amount of grammar. And you set up the grammar in the first few minutes. And if the grammar is going to be that you're involved in it, or you know, then you have to kind of introduce that. And if you're not involved in it, and if there's going to be, I mean, any number of different, and they haven't been invented yet. That's what's so cool about it, is that every new film like gives you new ideas for the grammar. And you know, it's kind of like in the closest thing in a feature film is with fantasy feature films, like in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. This beautiful scene of the fight on the trees. So if there was no grammar, you wouldn't be nervous that they were going to fall off the boughs. But at the same time, people can't fly. But they so artfully explain to you what the rules, without explaining. But you understand the rules are that they can sort of fly, but just sort of, but they also can fall, and so that's why you go along with that. And you do that even more so in documentaries. You set up these rules, and you can't mess with them, you know, once you kind of set them in place. Or you can mess with them a little bit, but not totally. Like in my Kid Can Paint That, I
had to get
halfway
in the story.
through. But believe me, in the editing, that was the biggest challenge. Was I came in the halfway mark in the film and totally broke the rules. Like, what, the director? We've been just ignoring him. And in early cuts, it did not work, you know. And classic feedback I got, which I always remember, is somebody said, "Dude, you think you're having a Charlie Kaufman moment in your film, but it's just confusing." Right? And people were saying to me, you gotta start this, you either have to take yourself out, which is stupid because that's the interesting part of that film, is like the journalism aspect of it, of the meta-narrative or whatever, or put yourself in, like start off the film. My name is Amir Bar Lev, and in 2005, I heard about a painter who blah, blah, blah. And that would have been cheesy as hell. That would have been like, you know, TV 60 Minutes kind of thing. So what we did, and we struggled with this mightily, but like what we figured out in the end was we we hint at me at the beginning. You see me at the very beginning, just very innocuously. It's before the credits even come up, basically. It's like a cold open moment, and you forget it in a way, but you don't forget it in another way. And it's just this one, like, very, very simple scene where you've introduced the idea that there is a director, and it stays in the back of people's mind, and then it works. If you didn't have that, I mean, I know from experience, it does not work. So I think that's a really interesting part of documentary.
How do you go about with the pre-production? Do you decide the short breakdowns? Because like when you're shooting it, it can change. If it's just a conversation between two people, it could go on for an hour, it could go on for 5 minutes. So then how do you set a timeline? Like how do you go about the pre-production documentary?
You mean like a schedule?
Yeah, like a schedule.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the story. I mean, like right now, my producers on this new film are saying, yeah, what's the schedule? And I'm just saying, I'm sorry, I know that you don't like to hear this, but I have no idea. I don't know when this trial's going to end. I don't know where these things are going. And they say, okay, I get it, you know. So, but on Regeneration, we knew exactly what was going to happen pretty much every day. And we had to ask the musicians, like, look, here's your timetable for coming up with these pieces of music. And so it's really dependent on, it's not rocket science. I mean, it's just, you can look at the situation and how much money you have and how to allocate it. And, yeah.
So, but then, would you have a script in place, or like?
I mean, I don't. Yeah. Well, I think that's another thing that depends on the story. But I think you don't go in blind. I think you have like a treatment which you're constantly revising, and it might just be for you and your crew to look at. And then it's helpful, like, you know, you want to try and, I mean, I'm stating the obvious, but you want everybody in your crew to feel ownership, right? You need all these different eyes on it. So if you share your idea of where it's going, whether you do it in a treatment or just a conversation early on, and then you continue to do that, then people come to you and say, like, Amir, you know, you said you wanted the big blow-up moment, but I don't see us going there. Like, you know, what about this? Or how about we provoke it that way, or whatever? So, you know, yeah, I think you do have a script.
I'm just really conscious now of Amir's time. I'm going to tell you, he hasn't eaten all day.
No, I'm cool. I'm really enjoying myself. Are we past?
No, we're good.
I don't want to.
We're good, but just have 2 more questions for him.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, so these 2. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. What do you think of internet as a way to distribute your documentaries?
Yeah. Well, okay. So right now, we've talked about killing your babies. So I hate killing my babies, but I do it. But then the babies haunt me. The dead babies haunt me. So, like on the Tillman story, I'm very sad about all the outtakes that got put on the cutting room floor. And same with Regeneration. And so I had this idea to make a non-linear web-based version of the Tillman story, where you can kind of, you know, we used to have, back when I was growing up, we had these things called Choose Your Own Adventures, which were books that were like non-linear books, right?
So, those are great.
So, you know, that's sort of the logic of the web, right? So I want to like have a version of the film that has a linear direction, but you can go non-linear and come back. And I'm pretty excited about it. It's a total clusterfuck right now. I'm sorry I'm swearing so much, but it's the international language. So, you know, I think there's a lot of hot air around it. I'm now going into this world a little bit, and I'm sort of, the jury is out for me a little bit about it. There are a lot of people, like I go to these like conferences like this where everybody talks about non-linearity and stuff, and since we're not going on camera, I can just say the blowhard, you know, the amount, like people just, they forget about the fact that you do need story. And same goes for like activism or something. Like there's this sense of like, because I went to this thing the other day and I wrote in my mind this little, like a spot or like a PSA about it. Because people getting up there and they were like, it was this thing, imagine a world, and like, you know, imagine a world without violence, imagine a world, you know, with peace on earth, and it was just like, it had to do with some, like, all you need to do is click a button. This is that Coney thing, right? You know, just like, people just think, just click a button, and it's like, come on, people have been actually trying to change the world, and are actually trying to change the world, and it involves actual work, out in the world, doing stuff. And you know, the button pushing is helpful, but only to a certain point. And it's disrespectful. And this spot I was imagining was like, you see like in Habitat for Humanity, people like building houses for other people. And it's like, some hand comes in like, and stops the hammer from actually building the house. Like, You know, like so that it would just be like first imagine before you do anything. But like, I think this is the mentality of like people like just want to just actually go build the house, right? And the same goes for the storytelling aspect. People are like, oh, you know, in the future we will be able to. Blah, blah, blah. It's like a story is a story, you know, and I think people are always going to need stories, and if they're delivered on the web, that's awesome. But like this idea that somehow it's going to totally change I mean, the reason that a story has been around for as long as language has been around is because it's something to do with the way the brain works, you know, and that's not changing anytime soon, as far as I know. But so I think, you know, web is great, but there's still a need for old-fashioned storytelling, and I'm realizing that as I foray into that world. Yeah.
So how did you like finance your first film? It was just out of your own pocket?
I got grants on the first film. Yeah, I got a grant from Soros and a grant from, and when I was in the Czech Republic, once I was on the tram, and I just started talking to two different people, and all three of us were there because of Soros. So one of them, I was making a doc, somebody else was doing some kind of political thing, and somebody else was doing some art thing. It was really amazing. But now, yeah, so I got grants on the first one, and the second one I just scrimped and saved and shot it really poorly and got the money from my parents and just friends. 10,000 here, 5,000 there. And then third one, well, on Trouble of Water, it was also a lot of grants and some investment at the end. And on Tillman, it was just commissioned by A&E. And Regeneration was Hyundai, which is, you know, it was really nice to, that's why we used prime lenses and, you know, dollies and smoke machines and, no, we didn't use smoke machines, but you know, we put the money on the screen, which was super fun, you know, and it's now I'm kind of addicted to that. Like, I'm trying right now to like force myself back into a little grittier of a look, but it's hard, you know, because when you know how good something can look, you know, you just. And the Tillman story was also kind of a high-end-ish look because there's nothing, you know, no B-roll, basically, just so we could afford to do that. But now I'm doing something that involves an unfolding story, and I'm sort of on the fence about whether to spend like a drunken sailor, as we did in Regeneration, or, you know, scrimp and save and eat peanut butter sandwiches like I did in other films. Thanks for having me.